stranger. This is Florina from Gentle Flow Stories. I'm glad you're here with me tonight. We'll spend a slow summer evening making homemade beached iced tea in a cozy apartment using a few ripe peaches, fresh tea, and a little honey, and plenty of time to let everything cool and settle. We'll prepare it as the afternoon light fades. Open the windows to the evening air and enjoy the first glass while the neighborhood becomes quieter outside. There is nothing complicated waiting for us tonight, only a small ritual and the comfort of doing something simple with care. If you'd like to return for more peaceful evenings like this, you can subscribe whenever it feels right. The apartment was still warm from the afternoon sun when you walked into the kitchen, though the worst of the heat had already begun to disappear. A soft golden light came through the open window above the sink, falling across the wooden countertop and catching the edges of the glass jars resting on the shelf. distant car passed along the street and disappeared around the corner. Someone closed the balcony door. A few birds moved through the trees, their wings almost invisible against the deepening sky. Then, from somewhere beyond the buildings, came the first soft sound of crickets. You noticed it without looking up. Another voice answered from farther away. Soon the evening had its familiar summer rhythm. The crickets remained in the background while you continued reading, never loud enough to interrupt the story. You finished another page and paused. The book was becoming heavier in your hands, not because it had changed, but because the evening had begun to settle into your body. Your shoulders had dropped slightly against the chair. Your legs rested comfortably beneath the light cotton blanket you had pulled across them. Even the hand holding the book had become softer, with your fingers resting loosely along the edge of the page. You took another sip of tea. There was less ice now. The peach slices had become softer. The evening continued. Eventually, you reached the end of the chapter. You placed a small bookmark between the pages and closed the book carefully, letting your hand rest on the cover for a moment before setting it down on a table. You carried the glass and the pitcher into the kitchen. There was very little to clean. The kitchen still carried the fragrance of fruit. You switched off the kitchen light and stood for a moment in the doorway. The apartment was almost completely dark now, except for the warm lamp beside the sofa. The open window remained slightly raised. The curtains moved softly in the night air. The sound of crickets had become clearer. Then you made your way toward the bedroom. The room was cooler than the rest of the apartment, and the sheets felt fresh against your skin as you slipped beneath them. You left the window slightly open, just enough for the summer air to move through the room. The curtains lifted gently, then settled against the wall again. You rested your head on the pillow and allowed yourself a few moments before closing your eyes. There was nothing special